This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Sam Merciers.
I'm Nate Blyton.
And our guest this week is composer and Mata Festival artistic director, Yotam Haber. Yotam, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and so the Mata Festival just finished. So it ran April 17th through 20th, so this is the morning after, as it were. But here on SoundNotion, there's no awkwardness.
Right.
So
I don't see the connection. Sorry.
I don't get it.
We were all looking at the schedule for Mata over these past few days, and it seemed like a pretty packed 4 days. And it all happened in Brooklyn. Is this correct?
The first night was actually in Manhattan. It happened at the Paula Cooper Gallery. Paula Cooper is in Chelsea. It's one of the most venerable of the Chelsea art galleries. It's been around for, I think, 30 years. And Paula has been a great, great supporter of new music in America for many years. She of course, came to us through her friendship with our executive producer, Philip Glass. He's the founder, along with Eleanor Sandretsky and Lisa Bielava, of the Mata Festival 15 years ago. And Philip Glass has of course so many friends around the world, and the visual art world is especially important to him. So we started the festival, as we have in several years past, with a kickoff party. It's somewhere between a concert and just a celebration at her gallery, and we had a taste of what was to come during the festival itself. Let's say the real concerts that were to come at Roulette the last 3 nights of the festival. So we had the Meitar Ensemble, this group that came from Israel for the first time to play. They played a short tidbit by a young Israeli composer and a little canon by Elliot Carter. And Mata, its cardinal rule is really that we are only presenting music by composers under 40. But we gave Elliot Carter a pass this time.
I was going to ask you about that.
You can't argue with that, though. It's like, oh well, yeah.
It's a good piece. I won't lie. And then because it is our 15th year, I thought it would be nice to have our past directors presented at that party. We called it our quinceañera party. And we had Chris McIntyre, who was the artistic director before me. He used to be the director at the Kitchen in New York. Mm-hmm. He's a wonderful composer.
I love that space. And
trombone player, and he played a solo trombone piece. And then Missy Mazzoli, who was the executive director 2 executive directors ago, she had her piece "Dissolve, Oh My Heart," I think that's called. Solo violin piece played. And Joan LaBarbera, who's on our board of directors, a legendary singer, composer, performer, she sang one of her own pieces. And then we just it's a chance for everybody associated, involved with the festival from all over the world coming together that first night. And we get to know each other. So and then even before that pre-festival thing at Paula Cooper, we had a pre festival thing just for the composers at a bar, obviously, again across the street from.
Seems to be a trend.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. It's a very exhausting week, but really great. And I have to say, it's always a little sad at the very end, because you really get to know these composers, and you sit on the rehearsals. You hear what it is that they're trying to achieve, and it's really a wonderful job, I have to say. Working with Mata, being a composer is just the most egotistical of all pursuits, and And it's great to have a job where you get out of the house and you're doing something for your musical community. So I really appreciate having that opportunity.
So for anyone in our audience, you kind of mentioned this already. Probably a lot of our audience is familiar with Mata, but maybe you could explain just basically what Mata is and how it's different from other kinds of festivals.
As far as I know, at least in America, there is really nothing like Mata in that we are so specific about what we program. We're really only open to young composers. We were founded by Philip Glass, Lisa Bielava, and Eleanor Sandreski in 1996. And what we do is we commission, promote, and present music by young composers. The application process is completely free, and the last 2 years has been online, completely digital, making it very painless to apply. And this year we received 650 applications, making us the most applied for compositional opportunity in the world. Wow. And so it's what we do is we choose every year a different panel of composers, performers, conductors who sit and look at this massive pile of music, and we program the festival from that. So this year we had about 20 composers on that festival, called from last year's application, which pool, which was 600 composers applied last year. So it's really quite an achievement to get on the Mata Festival. And I like to tell people who apply that they really should try again. If you didn't get in this year, please send it again, because oftentimes it's not that one composer is better than another composer. There's so much great music out there. It's simply that we're juggling the very complicated jigsaw puzzle of working with ensembles, booking ensembles from Europe and outside of America more than 2 years sometimes before the actual festival, and then trying to interlock that with composers. So the jury might choose a wonderful composer who simply just doesn't have anything in their catalog that will work in a given year. So in those cases, we really, really encourage composers to try again. We've had composers who've applied 5 or 6 years in a row and then finally receive a commission. And so it's worth trying. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that the way that we work is we ask the composers to send just 2 pieces and a work list of everything that they have. So we're not necessarily going to program the 2 pieces that you send. Sometimes we see that you have a wonderful piccolo quartet, and that's just not going to work, even though it's a great piece. So we look at your catalog and see what can work. When we find a composer who we think really ought to be on the festival, we do everything we can to try to make that work. And then we're always presenting pre-existing works with a few new commissions every year. So this year we commissioned 3 composers, one from Canada, one from America, and one from Holland.
That's great. I love that you're looking at the composers a little bit more holistically. So often you see these calls for scores, and they're for this very particular instrumentation. And if you don't have anything for that, then you're SOL. Or you could write something for that, and then if it doesn't get picked, then you just wrote this thing that just sits in a drawer. Yeah. So it's really great that you're doing that. And how involved in commissioning is Mata? Excuse me.
Well, we commission about 3 to 5 pieces every year. And so the festival is always a mix of pre-existing works and new works. This year we commissioned one of the 3 composers. We commissioned a young Dutch composer named Jobina Tinnemans, and she applied with no actual notated scores. Everything. The only thing she sent us was a video, and it was a video of a happening, an installation of some sort in an empty grain silo in Germany, and it involved live electronics, professional ping pong players, and gardeners on stage pruning shrubbery on stage.
Wow.
And it was one of the most bizarre things that anyone on the jury had ever seen. They were completely floored by it. And even though she had no notated music at all, she was awarded one of the 3 commissions this year. And so she traveled to America several months before the festival and worked with local knitters. She decided that she wanted to, of course, we gave her carte blanche. And so she said she would like to assemble an orchestra of 25 knitters.
What is the average age of that orchestra?
I don't know. We had men and women alike. I didn't know that there's such a thing existed, but there's a website called menwhoknit.com, and we had some really serious, very, very serious men knitting on stage, and then she decided she wanted to use a guzheng, which is a Chinese zither-like instrument, and piano and clarinet and cello, lighting, electronics. It was really fun and also kind of a leap of faith to allow this young voice to just really experiment and do some really strange things, and it was really fun.
I think we have some photos of some of that, some of the knitting.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these knitting volunteers had started working months previously, creating this tapestry, and as you can see on stage, they're knitting, and it was sort of like that Baroque idea of the ripieno and the soloists. So there was the 20 knitters in the back making the orchestra, and then in front were 5 soloists, and these soloists, this picture here I think is the soloists. They have knitting needles that are connected to electronic triggers. So every time that the 2 knitting needles touch each other, they create a current. And so it's a simple on-off switch, which then triggers sound samples that Yobina, standing right there in that photo, is manipulating.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yobina is Dutch, but she lives in Wales, in England, in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing at all to do except for sheep and knitting. So we actually received support from the Wales yarn or wool association, and we had this wool donated to us, and it generated an incredible amount of interest. I really don't think that this is a gimmick, but I have to say that it's that when you incorporate some extra musical element to your concert series, you're bringing in oftentimes an audience that would normally never come to a show like this. So we had a totally packed house of knitting aficionados, and just
love it.
Curious people that ordinarily would never come to a contemporary music concert. And that was exciting for us because we're always working on audience building.
That's a great kind of strategy for outreach, is to include some kind of non-musicians in the performance of the work. That's very cool. I like that a lot. Did you get any feedback from either the knitter? So these knitters that were on stage, these are not musicians. These are just knitters that you found.
Hardcore knitters.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of knitting serve lists and communities, and I mean, these people, I think some of them had never been to a contemporary music concert in their life, but then they stayed for the whole concert. They saw everything else that was on that program, and hopefully we converted some people.
Did you get to talk to any of them afterwards?
Absolutely.
What'd they say?
Well, people loved it. People loved being a part of it. People, a lot of very sophisticated New Yorkers who lead lives of going to museums and seeing art galleries and seeing new visual art simply have no idea what's happening in the new music world. So it's what we take for granted is just a completely eye-opening experience for folks who've never heard any music written after the 19th century.
So did you get how many, like, if you put out a call for knitters?
Did you get 600 of those applications too?
Yeah, like, how do you, is there a knitting audition?
We had a knitting audition.
Are you serious?
I'm just kidding. You
To
have
me,
to knit between 60 to 80 knits. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a thing? They can measure
the idea
knits?
of getting knitters to me is intriguing because I learned how to crochet as a young man, and
Be proud of it. Be proud of that.
That's right.
it's knitting or crocheting is not the task of a lazy, unengaged person. There's I think someone who takes the time to knit something and completes a project, that's an admirable thing, and not without a level of technical skill and depending on how they, how into it they are with sort of artistic interpretation,
Right.
Well,
It's interesting to see what those people would think about new music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, there's a real math to the geometry of knitting, but it was also there was a real performative aspect to seeing this this group on stage. They all got up on stage a few minutes before the actual piece began, although it's, of course, questionable when the piece began, but they sat on stage and just quietly continued knitting. And it was without any electronic amplification, without anything at the beginning, just this very quiet clicking sounds. And it was really quite lovely, especially in the context of, a concert of sounds of so-called music, to have just this kind of musique concrète sounds was lovely. And there's something so intimate about watching someone knit. I think you're making something. You're making an object that has no hard edges. And it's warm, it's soft. There's a lot of stuff going on there that could be unpacked.
Well, and the act itself is something that's usually it's done solitarily, or if it's done in a group, done with relatively close friends, sitting around and hanging out in this informal setting, and then contextualizing that, with a stage and all the trappings of a concert, I think is a really interesting idea. Yeah.
Such a brilliant piece of content.
Yeah.
How long was the performance proper? I mean, after everybody was on stage, and then at some point it was over and people clapped.
Yeah.
How long was that part?
The whole thing from beginning to end was about a half an hour. Wow. So on that program, this was the 19th of April. There were only four pieces on the whole program that night. And we wanted to do that to really, not to give the concert the feel of a variety show, to give a real coherence to the pieces, and also to give composers the freedom to unfurl their piece at a more leisurely rate. I think too often in new music festivals, you just want to pack so many pieces. You want to give so many opportunities to so many deserving composers. So you have these interminably long concerts, which don't do a real service to the audience, who get tired, and I think often don't give a great service to the composers themselves. I personally am not a fan of the marathon idea of it just does not. It's not great for anyone involved.
Right. Especially, something like hearing all this music that you are pretty sure you're going to be hearing for the first time. It's a lot of mental energy that's put into listening, engaging with this music for the first time. That's really exhausting to do for 2 or 3 hours. So it's great to hear that that's something you're considering. One thing that I think is interesting, reading some of what I've read about this year's Mata Festival and past year's Mata Festivals, are new kinds of kind of performance frameworks like this knitting thing. And I'm wondering if doing this for a couple of years and seeing all these entries that are coming in and seeing the performances that come out of the festival, if you notice any particular trends or any commonalities between what young composers are doing that you think might indicate some things that we're going to see some more of going forward.
It's always fascinating as we are looking through the applications to see the schools of composition that still exist today. It gets to a point where sometimes you can guess where a composer has studied or is studying before you even look at their bio. I think that geographically and community-based, young composers are often deeply reliant on the voices of authority around them. So whether they like it or not, when you're studying with a big voice, with a composer who has a real compositional unique sound, it's hard to avoid it when you're starting out as a composer. It takes a long time for a composer to find their own voice, if they ever do. And I remember when I was in graduate school, I studied with Stephen Stuckey, who would tell all his students that he said, "I expect that you'll write your best music as soon as you escape school." And that's true. I remember being in the library and looking at Chris Rouse's doctoral dissertation. Chris Rouse went to Cornell, and the music that he wrote when he was in school is absolutely nothing like the music that he wrote after. It's day and night. So when we are looking at applications, you can imagine that with more than 600 applications, the jury can't listen very long to pieces. And the trick is simply putting on a recording that immediately captures your ear. It's something that sounds like nothing else you've ever heard.
So you heard it here first. That's how you get into the Mata Festival, kids.
I think if I can give a piece of advice for people applying, not just to the Mata Festival, but any competition, it's on the CD or a sample that you send in, make sure to send 2 samples for every work that you send. I don't know if this is totally obvious, but always send the full work, and then send a 30-second to 2-minute excerpt of the best part, absolutely the best part of that piece. People joke about writing music that wins competitions, and that's a little sad. I don't believe that that's true. But there are smart ways of helping your jury, and think about them for a second. Think about those poor jurors that have to sit there and listen to 600 composers.
Yeah.
Find that 30 seconds that just jumps out, the 30 seconds that you are so proud of, that will turn heads. If you have a 75-minute orchestra piece that starts out with a 15-minute slow adagio introduction, think about if that's really the best part, the part that will really jump off the page for your jury. So these are realistic things. They're it's unfortunate that that's how it works, but I think that at the beginning of most composers' careers, competitions are, for better or worse, an important part, and it's good to know how to navigate through those.
That's good advice.
It's editorial advice, not compositional advice. I like it.
That's the kind of advice that we don't ever get in. You don't get that in school.
No,
You don't.
Nobody tells you how to do that kind of stuff.
It's really amazing. We get composers who send in scores that are simply 8.5 by 11 pages that they printed out, that are not double-sided, that aren't even bound, just loose pages. And you think to yourself, where did they study? Somebody,
Who told them this was okay?
As a composition teacher, your responsibility shouldn't just be to sit at the lesson and talk about the notes, but there should be some professional development too, I think, and
Absolutely.
And we need to teach young composers how to sell themselves. So loose leaf, single-sided pages, definitely not. But then, the funny thing is that there's a curve, in that that the jury can be turned off by the opposite extreme, with scores that are printed on each page is glossy, that there's a fancy color cover. Those I've noticed too are can be a big turnoff for a jury when you spend so much time on your score and make it glittery and pretty that
scented.
It gets scented, scratch and sniff. That you
Actually, that would be pretty cool, I have to admit.
Yeah, so that's the opposite extreme.
Speaking of,
and I would also say to folks that the bigger the ensemble does not mean better. Right. A lot of people like to send in their operas, their full evening length works, and their symphonies, and we rarely ever do perform those kinds of pieces. And the fact that you have written a symphonic work is nice, but it's not. It's really not. It's not that.
It's not what you're
impressive.
looking for.
It's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for the most interesting music, and we had works for solos and duos, and it's just about the music. It's really nothing else.
Well, Yotam, we've been talking about mentoring younger composers, and I wanted to ask you about the Mata Interval Concert Series.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about this, and I wonder if you could I'm sure you can describe it better than me, so why don't you just tell us about that?
Intervals started about 5 years ago by Chris McIntyre, the artistic director before me. It's a great new addition to the festival. What it means is that now we have a presence throughout the year rather than just during the festival itself. And we have a separate call for composers, performers, artists, whomever. It's open to anyone from any background to propose an evening, propose a concert. We will give you a budget, and we will help you out. We will teach you the ropes of PR and working with schedules, setting up programs, everything that you kind of need to know to put on a concert. And it's pretty much you're on your own, and you get to put on your own concert in New York City. And we're there just a little bit to hold your hand, but it's you can fail or succeed on your own. It's your own thing, and it's really fun. And we often give opportunities to the types of concerts that you just really wouldn't even see on the Mata Festival. Last year, we had a pianist curate. Her name is Sugar Vendel, and Sugar is very interested in fashion, the fashion world. She made an evening of music that was composed in collaboration with fashion designers. Which is fascinating. The idea of how can fashion affect music and vice versa. Very strange evening, very, very strange, where all the performers were dressed in really colorful and bizarre things, and there was a pre-concert talk about the connections between these two art forms. So that's one idea, one example. This year we had Owen Weaver, one of the best percussion players in New York. He proposed a concert of music for found instruments, found objects. So that's another wonderful way of getting onto the Mata Festival, by just proposing something that you've always wanted to hear, a collection of pieces that you think would be great together, an idea that you think might be a little risky. That's what we're looking for. So look out for that on our website for the next call.
You know, that story about the fashion-based concert reminds me a lot of the knitting concert that we talked about, that there's the potential to bring in people that are interested in that kind of inspiration for the work that may not necessarily be the kind of people that would be looking for a recital of new music to attend. So that's a really cool thing. I wonder, was that effective in doing that as well?
I think that certainly had a role in it. We are looking for ways of opening up our audiences, and that was a packed concert with not the usual suspects. You know, when you travel in the contemporary music world, after 2 or 3 concerts, you start seeing the same people at every concert, right?
Yeah.
And then it's always refreshing when you see someone and you think to yourself, I don't know who you are. And
do you introduce yourself? It sounds like that could be awkward.
I like introducing myself.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Yotam.
Thank you for coming. We're very grateful to have you here.
You sound like you're trying to get somebody to come back to your church or something.
It's Church of New Music.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, you as a composer are overseeing all these things. Do you take anything from here that that particularly inspires you, or that you? Is there anything that has caused your music to grow as a result of the work you've done with the Mata Festival?
Absolutely. I mean, my favorite part of the festival is always attending the rehearsals in preparation for the concert. There's no better composition lesson that you can get than watching people rehearse a new work, trying to figure out how a piece operates. And you learn so much on what to do, what not to do, how to use time in the best possible way. You know, when you're rehearsing these works for the festival, there's a very limited amount of time to prepare for them. So you see how composers interact with performers, and you can see how to make the best use of your time. I find I often see composers who are just not used to speaking to performers, not used to verbalizing what it is they want. I mean, they are composers after all, and music is hard to talk about. But I think that one thing that I've learned is when you sit down at a rehearsal and you're watching the players massacre or not your piece, you cannot just be sitting there listening. You have to have a pencil and you have to be writing constantly, because the second they stop, they're gonna look at you and they're gonna ask, "How was that?" And so often I see the composer going, "Yeah, that was pretty good. Okay, thank you." And then later they come to me and they lament and they say, "Oh, I wish they had done that differently." you had the opportunity to say something and you didn't. We had a so as part of the festival this year, we had this Israeli ensemble, the Meitar ensemble, a truly amazing Pierrot group based in Israel, and they gave a reading session. So another little call for scores that we had was, for this reading session, we chose 3 American composers and 2 Israeli composers, and they were asked to write 2 to 3 minute sketch for the thing. And these were younger composers than we even have usually on the festival. They came to the workshop, and several of them, the majority of them, really, each composer got about 20 minutes for these. That's a tiny amount of time, right? And when you have that little time, you have to be prepared to say something, and you shouldn't be prodded to say. So, you were asking, what do I get from the festival? As a composer, I see how you need to talk to an ensemble, and how to relate with a group in a polite, diplomatic way, but to ask them to do what it is that you want it to do. And you can see how many time-saving devices you can put in the score already that will save a lot of time. So many composers fall in one of 2 camps. I was saying that you often see composers who put so many indications in their music that it might take a lot of time just before you're even able to put that first finger on your fingerboard. You have an index. I saw a piece this week that the glossary for the piece actually said, this piece is in 3/4. And I thought to myself, that is unbelievable. Why would you need to write that in the glossary? But there was so much information in there that the musicians simply didn't even know where to get started. And the opposite extreme is a composer that doesn't put any indication, a la Bach. And we simply can't get away with that in our era. We're not in a common practice, and that's lazy composing. If you just have nothing in there, and it creates exactly the same problems as having too much in there. So I find that successful pieces are those that allow the performers some flexibility, so they don't feel like robots or automatons, that they're not just sitting there and thinking that they're simply being used by the composer and being told exactly when to press the note down, exactly what volume, where on the fingerboard, how loud, how soft, but giving that illusion that you as the composer are giving the performers the ability to put their own individuality in their performance. That's an incredible balancing act for a composer to do, to write exactly what your own wishes are, and at the same time allowing the performer to feel like they can put their own input in the work.
Yeah, especially I think when there are so many things that you might want to express that don't have a standard form of symbols that you can use in the score, that you have to write some kind of instructive front matter for the score as well. It just compounds everything that you have to try to explain everything in a paragraph or 14 paragraphs before the first of the score actually begins.
Yeah. Well, it's not a black and white issue. I mean, sometimes when you're really trying to create a new way of using an instrument, include a
YouTube video or something.
The 5 lines and the little black dots that we use might not be sufficient for everything that we want to create these days. But the ultimate goal is to make a score that is workable. And not just a work of art. Don't make the score. The score is a vehicle. It's not the end product, right? I often see scores that are just so gorgeous you could frame them, but I question how useful they are for the performer and whether there are simpler ways of notating things.
I believe Dave has a framed score right behind him.
Yeah, I've got a couple over my shoulder here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Cajun Crumb. So I don't want to take up any more of your time, Yotam. I know you've had a very busy week. But just real quickly before we let you go, how can people follow what's going on with you and what's going on with Mata Festival, and how they can get involved?
Well, matafestival.org. We tweet, we Facebook. Become our friends. We will become your friends. And if you're in New York, please just write to us and stop by the Mata office. We always want to meet new composers, and I really mean that. Just let us know that you're in town, and we'd love to get to know you. So all that info is on our website. Our next show is at Galapagos, a very funky space in Brooklyn, on May 16th. It's the last interval show for the season, and then we're gearing up for next year, which is going to be the biggest festival in Mata's history. That's what we're aiming to have.
Great. Well, listen, Yotam, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's
a
tough to get up the morning after a big I'm sure you had a big blowout last night after the festival ended, so we really appreciate it, and it was great talking to you.
Likewise, guys. You guys are doing a great thing with this show. I love it.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Amazing.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
It's interesting. He was talking about scores, and we were talking about the effectiveness of a score. The Pulitzer Prize winner for this year, Carole Shaw,
just announced this week.
I can't remember where I read it because I've read several pieces about her.
You're talking about Deemer.
Yeah, I think so. He talks. Oh, yeah, because he had a copy of the score. Rob Deemer, friend of the show, Rob Deemer had a copy of the score that she graciously sent him, and she says that she considers a recording of the ensemble Roomful of Teeth singing it as a part of the score, because she wrote it in a situation where she had a very intimate understanding of what each member of the ensemble was capable of doing vocally, and catered the piece really to match those skill sets. And it's for someone else to effectively portray the piece now, she thinks there's no way to effectively notate those noises, so you have to watch the score and listen to the sort of, the template performance, if you will, which is the original. So I think that's an interesting take on the more modern...
very pop music-ish.
Yeah, it's very pop music-ish, and that's what I think a lot of times the connection between, newer art music and pop music is not form or harmony. It's the way it gets generated in and of itself. Is it collaborative? Is it built in a way that really relies on the personality of a singer or singers or a group? Whereas the classical, straight up classical music tradition would be you're making this set of instructions that could be transferred equally well all over the place, and whoever's going to play it is going to play it, and it's going to be finger quotes the same.
Yeah.
But doing this piece or doing Everything in Its Right Place or any other sort of pop format song, it's going to be very different depending on who does it, because it itself is built heavily on the personality of the performers.
Right.
At band practice or whatever.
Right. At band practice.
Yeah.
So what did we all think of this piece?
It kind of kicked ass.
Yeah.
I thought it was
I think
really
we can
great.
all pretty much say that.
It makes you want to sit up and beg for buttermilk.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds like you liked it.
I did.
So I couple of thoughts that I had when I first saw this. First, it's a piece for the first time in a while where you could go out right away and listen to. It's been a few years since the piece that won the Pulitzer has a commercial recording that you can go and grab right away, which is awesome. Since they added that step, that qualification that you could get a Pulitzer for. It used to be, it had to be premiered in the last calendar year, it can also now have received its premiere recording in the last calendar year, which is great.
Oh, so that's a funny thing, though, because is it both? Because the piece was first performed a few years ago.
It is interesting because this piece seems to, from what I can tell, was actually kind of 4 separate pieces that were premiered over a few years and then kind of brought back together to be this 4-part piece. Anyway, so there's that. Also, I've continued to correspond via email with our guest from last week's show, Alex Shapiro. And shortly after this was announced, Alex said, "Hey, speaking of what we talked about last week, we got a lady winning the Pulitzer this week." So that was cool. Also, she's 30 years old. So
the youngest winner.
The youngest Pulitzer winner ever, which is very exciting and makes me feel terrible for having accomplished nothing in 30 years. Like, she's 30 and just got a Pulitzer. What the heck have you ever done with your life?
You want to start quoting Fight Club. This is Sam's boiling discontent.
Right. So, and then also another thing that we talked about, and I don't think this is what Alex meant, but we talked last week about the virtues of being a composer/performer, and that's exactly what Carole Shaw, the Pulitzer winner, does. She's not only is she the composer of this work, but in that commercial recording by Roomful of Teeth, which is a fantastic recording that you should all check out, and we'll listen to a little bit of at the end of the show today. She's one of the singers on that recording, and she also plays the violin with the American Contemporary Music Ensemble. So she is herself a composer-performer, and in a couple of the interviews, profiles that have come out this week, they comment on the fact that she doesn't often think of herself first as a composer, but rather as a musician that does all these different things, which is great that the Pulitzer is recognizing more people that are more generalists, which is really great. You know, a few years ago, the last one I can think of was Ornette Coleman. So anyway, what did you guys think? I've kind of rambled for a bit.
Well, the piece itself is great, and I love the fact that it's so simple is not the right word, because the musical effect you feel after you're done listening to it isn't one of just simplicity like that, but it's a very forthright presentation. I don't know how else to put that. You know what I mean?
Very clear.
It's very, like, here it is. It sounds like, at the beginning at least, it sounds really similar to stuff you've heard before. And even when there are different things going on that you might not be more familiar with, it still sounds familiar in a lot of ways somehow. And, you know, the striking thing to me was reading about how the Pulitzer is selected. And we were talking about this before the show, and probably I was ignorant about how the process worked completely. So maybe there's tons of people out there who know this, but it's a simple $50 entry fee. Anybody can nominate a piece that's, you know, fits the criteria of being by an American composer, premiered or whatever it is inside the last year, and $50 and you're in. So I'm predicting that having someone so young and such a hit piece win is going to lead to a slew of entries next year.
Do you think we're ever going to see, so they've been trying to be more inclusive of the styles of music, do you think we're ever going to see more of these kind of pop, crossover makes it sound like I'm talking about Il Divo or something, but like, you know, what I hate to call indie classical, but that kind of thing.
When enough people
something
die.
Something like Nico Muhly.
When enough people die.
Well, that's very a happy thought.
But it's the truth.
With the generation
it's the
shift,
truth.
Yeah. Somebody like a Nate Blyton could win a Pulitzer then.
You mean will win a Pulitzer?
Will win a Pulitzer.
Yes.
Just gotta start writing music again.
So should we get into this last story and then bounce back to the Pulitzer real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So crazy stuff going on with Minnesota Orchestra. Still no good news, but they have now canceled all of their concerts through May 12th, 2013, which I don't know exactly what their scheduled season was, but that's got to be pretty darn close to the remainder of their season. Drew McManus, who has at Adaptistration.com been keeping a Minnesota Orchestra doomsday clock, which is exactly as bright and cheery as it sounds like it is, he has moved the Minnesota Doomsday Clock now to 6 minutes to midnight. Being the kind of guy that he is. So there's our Minnesota Doomsday Clock at 6 minutes to midnight. Thank you, Drew. It's astonishing how little has happened to work through this. There have been more kind of negotiations back and forth in the press, and I won't get into any of the specifics on that because we just don't have time, and we spent a lot of time talking to Yotam Haber this morning. But you should all go to adaptation.com and read Drew's latest post about it. There are some discrepancies about they've kind of the management has called out the musicians in the press and defined their work week as like a 21-ish hours work week, because that's the amount of time that they literally spend in the hall rehearsing and performing, which is completely ridiculous. So anyway, some really, and also I would say on this comment, and often is the case with Drew's posts on these kinds of things, some really interesting comments that I would commend to you as well. Some really long comments.
Yeah. I think it's fun that Drew seems to have a very even hand and really gives a good perspective on any issue like this, but he also figures out how to very politely point out who he thinks the D-bag is in the situation.
He's so diplomatic. He can't make enemies like that.
Right.
It's his business.
Drew's going to run for president someday.
That's right. I'd vote for him.
President of music.
Yes. So let's bounce back to the Pulitzer Prize. Our pick of the week this week is, Sam, why don't you set this up?
The pick of the week!
Sorry, I almost stepped right through that.
Yeah, that was one of the best ones
close.
yet.
That was a good one, yeah. I like you using the room sound. That's nice.
That was full on reverb with the top end of the EQ cranked all the way up this time to see how that would work.
Well, it seemed to work very well. So our pick of the week this week is the Partita for 8 Voices by Carole Shaw, as recorded by Roomful of Teeth. Do you guys have a movement that you really? We didn't really talk about this before the show. I really like all of them.
I like all of them. I think we should do the first movement though, as it goes into the melodic part.
I don't know. I really like that part where they do the throat and tooth singing.
It's at the end.
Throat and tooth singing.
So. Patrick, do you want to talk about the tooth and throat singing? Do you want to?
I don't know.
It's not nice.
Just kidding.
Just read the New York Times is what we're saying.
Yeah.
So they're really cool piece. Uses a lot of excellent extended techniques. Some tube and throat singing, some kind of belting, kind of very bright belting sounds. In Rob Deemer's writing about this week, he described it as similar to a Bulgarian women's choir, but the first thing I thought of was New England hymnody, like shape note singing, that kind of very bright nasal sound, but it's very cool.
I kind of think of Bulgarian radio, women's radio choir.
Yeah, well, that's what he was talking about. And that's probably more like
that open mouth sound.
It's definitely like a big open mouth delivery, not holding back kind of sound.
And not the kind of sound that you get if you just write the notes and give it to a choir.
Right.
Right.
So anyway, very cool piece. One thing that I think, and Rob pointed this out as well, is the names of the movements are all Baroque dance suites, and the first one is Allemande, but then as soon as you start hearing them say the word Allemande, they're saying it in the square dance pronunciation where they say Allemande, and so Allemande left in it like that. It's very funny. So which one?
Yeah, and we should point out that if you want a piece that doesn't do like an in-depth like harmonic analysis or anything, but really digs into the piece, the Deemer article this week was really good.
Yeah. So, and you can listen to the whole thing on the Spotify. So, without spending a dime, though you should spend several dimes. And interestingly, an awesome feature of new music or of digital music. This had been available since last year, I think. This album, but just yesterday, as we're recording this, the page on Carole Shaw's site about this piece was updated to include a link to a digital EP on iTunes of just this piece. So
Yeah.
that's very
Smart
cool.
move.
Yeah,
Time to
very smart
capitalize.
move. Very
Yep.
smart move. So which one are we going to listen to now?
I voted for Allemande, but
All right,
I mean,
let's listen to
whatever.
the Allemande. This is from the beginning. You should listen to more of it though, because it kicks all the ass.
To the side.
To the side.
To the side.
And around.
Through the middle
To
and
the side.
To the side.
to the side.
And around.
Through the middle
To the
and
side.
To the side.
to the side.
To the side.
And around.
And around and around
And around and around.
To the side. 2, 3, 4,
And
5.
across. 6, 7, 8.
Through the midpoint.
Of the line drawn from the left side.
Allemande left.
Allemande left and around and around.
Allemande and around.
A square divided horizontally and vertically into
the
4
diamond,
equal parts.
Allemande
One
left.
gray,
The wall
one
is
yellow,
boarded and
one
divided
red.
into 4 equal parts.
So that was an excerpt from Roomful of Teeth's recording of this year's Pulitzer Prize-winning piece by Carole Shaw, Partita for 8 voices. That was from the Allemande. Fantastic recording. Get it on iTunes, get it on Amazon, wherever you like to get your digital music, or I guess you could order the CD from Amazon too, or you can just stream it from Spotify. It's definitely worth your about 25 minutes. Very, very cool piece. And that's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Again, he's no longer on the call, but we want to thank Yotam Haber for joining us this morning. You should definitely check out everything he's doing with the Mata Festival, and we'll have links to that and all kinds of other things, everything else we talked about on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also leave us a comment if you have any thoughts on this year's Pulitzer winner, if you have any thoughts on the Mata Festival or young composers or any of the things that we talked about today. You can leave those comments there. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at SoundNotion as a group on Twitter. The Mata Festival is at Mata Festival. I'm at Dave McDowell. Nate is at Innate Tree. Patrick is at Vox Shibuya. Sam is at Housegoy. So we would love to continue this conversation with you there. If you have any stories that you'd like us to discuss on future episodes of SoundNotion, you can tweet those at us and use the hashtag SNWeekly, which we always check when we're putting the show order together. You can subscribe to us in the iTunes store, catch every episode automatically. If you'd like to support our show, you can go to our site on the right-hand side. There's a Amazon search box, and you can use your search box to buy your Amazon junk. I know I just bought some printer toner this week, so anything you're buying could be Bad Mamma Jamma printer toner cartridges for your Bad Mamma Jamma printer that you use to print off your Bad Mamma Jamma large format scores. Or it could
be golf discs.
Could be golf discs. Could be golf balls if you're a more traditional golfer. Whatever you're doing, and we'll get a couple percentage points commission on that, and we really appreciate that. It doesn't do anything differently for you, but it really helps us out. So thank you to those of you who have done that already, and thank you to those of you who continue to do that. Our music in the introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you back next week.